December 2022, two Jerseymen set off to take part in the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, known as the world's toughest row. The challenge would take them across the width of the Atlantic Ocean from the Canary Islands to Antigua, a journey of 3,000 miles which would take almost 8 weeks. In this episode of Bailiwick Podcasts, I, Tom Innes, am joined by Pete Wright and Steve Hayes, the two members of DragonFish Row, fresh off the oars and still fundraising for the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust and Macmillan Cancer Support. We discussed the pair's preparations for their gruelling race across the Atlantic, the trials and tribulations of life on the high seas, and what it felt like to finally step onto dry land in sunny Antigua. So, Steve, we were literally just saying Pete was about 2 minutes ahead of you that that he's been back nearly 3 weeks now, 2 weeks back. How's it been, gents? Getting back to being on dry land first of all in Antigua and then back at home in Jersey. Is it just a completely freaky change of scenery, or have you adjusted quite well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've adjusted perfectly well. I can only speak for me, but there was no big shocks or surprises. I think we were looking forward to hitting land, and sort of arriving in Antigua was great. And then we both had a few days there. I had a bit longer, but we had a nice little holiday in the Caribbean before coming back to the UK. And
sleeping, does that those next few nights in Antigua, and then I suppose a tiny bit of jet lag maybe coming back here, but you sort of back into that normal routine? Because what was the longest that you would have slept on while you were at sea?
I would say about an hour and a half, 2 hours at a time. So combined, we were probably getting, about 4 to 5 hours sleep per day. But that was mainly kind of little intervals in the evening.
And then back once you're on dry land, was it 4 to 5 hours to begin with, or how did that?
No, it didn't take long to adjust at all. Really, a few sort of maybe 2 or 3 broken night sleeps of getting used to it and getting used to being in a bed again, but no more than 2 or 3 days, and then I was back to normal. I sleep pretty well anyway.
And you're the same, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first night I eventually got back to the apartment and just laid in bed, couldn't sleep. But I just kept thinking, this is a whole lot better than being on a tiny boat and having to walk to a bucket or something like that. So I took the positives and just enjoyed broken sleep for a little bit longer. And
that I know you had quite a few family out there. Some loved ones were back here, and it was a few days before you could catch up with them. But that first night there, I mean, it was the early hours by the time you were actually off the boat in Antigua. Was that still time for beers and food and everything like that? What happened on those first few hours?
Yeah, so I mean, as soon as we finished, we came off the boat, and there was a bit of a sort of crowd there. So we were interviewed. They dispersed quite quickly and went back to their beds because it was sort of 12:30 in the morning. And then we had a quick burger, quick beer, and then went our separate ways. Pete went back to his hotel with his dad, and I went back to my hotel with my wife, where I then met my wife was there, and my sister-in-law and my 2-year-old daughter. So I stayed up until about 3 in the morning, had a few glasses of rum, and regaled the ladies with the stories of the high seas, and then promptly passed
So they
out.
were probably asleep before you were, is that?
Yeah. You only know me 10 minutes. I bored them a little bit and had a few glasses of rum and fell asleep.
And but Pete, what about you doing the same treatment on your old man?
Same thing with his dad.
I went back with my dad. Had a couple of beers kind of outside with him. And then I'd asked him to get me a big tub of chocolate ice cream, so I just made a big dent in that and then passed out.
That was in a sort of rummy, ice creamy, knackered sort of coma,
absolutely,
was it?
Yeah, absolutely. Ice cream coma.
It was quite strange, actually. When I got back, ours wasn't really a hotel, it was almost like an apartment type thing, but outside on the terrace, it was a sort of open bar, honesty bar, if you like. And there was a freezer there with ice, so I went to get some ice for the rum. And that was the first time I'd felt cold for 2 months. Just felt that temperature sensation, which was really, really weird. I hadn't realised I'd missed it, and hadn't realised I hadn't had it. And it was, everything that we had was 28 degrees, whether that was to eat or to drink, or you were just constantly warm, being cooked by the sun. You'd get in the sea, that was warm as well. So everything was warm. We never felt cold for that couple of months.
And that was even at the outset. From I wasn't really studying the weather in the Canary Islands in December. That's
warm. Yeah.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah,
so you did. It wasn't like
mid-20s, high 20s. So
okay.
It's, I opened the freezer door and this sort of cold cloud came out. And I was like, wow, I hadn't felt ice. It was quite strange. And then it went in the glass of rum.
And you mentioned being back, being back in Jersey, and I guess that's we are having a bit of a cold snap at the moment, and that's maybe a slight shock to the system.
Yeah, it's all right. We're used to it.
Yeah, we both quite like the cold as well. So just as long as we've got the right clothing, that's all good.
And we were also just talking before you got in, Steve, about the Have a Go Row yesterday, and doing that. So November 19, you think that you first did that? What was the sort of thought process? Did you just speak the week before? Shall we go down to this, or had you been talking about challenges? How did you get there?
I mean, we'd already signed up to row across the Atlantic, so that was probably August, September time. We'd paid our deposit, so we'd committed to rowing across the Atlantic long before November came along. And then I said to Pete, look, I've just seen a poster advertising Have a Go at Row sessions at the rowing club. We really should go down there and learn to row. So we went down there, and somebody must have said something because somebody knew what we were up to. And so the lady that was organising it, Anna Tredant, kind of knew what we were up to. And then, that was our first foray into rowing, coastal rowing. We were put in a boat with 2 others and a cox, and that was our first session of rowing. So we did about 2 or 3 weeks in a fours boat, and that was it. We locked down then, and the next time we went rowing was in a solos boat
February.
A few months later,
Yeah.
February, in 2020. So it was nice to be down there yesterday and to see how popular it was. I think they had 9 boats, so that's kind of 40 people that were down there having a go at rowing. So if they can increase their membership by 40 possible potential rowers in a year, that's great. We won't take full credit.
And with the looking at the how you got to do this, Pete, was the idea. I mean, I've just learnt for the first time that you paid the deposit before you got in a boat, and so who suggested to who, and how did that come about?
I'll solely put the blame with Steve on this one. It came about by Steve sending me an email one evening, which I kind of read with a combination of excitement and absolute horror, where he's kind of putting this proposal to row the Atlantic to me, but equally spelling out what's involved in terms of cost, time away from family, time away from work. So that was some huge considerations. Luckily, the family and the work agreed fairly quickly, and that left us kind of working out how we were going to fund the whole thing. And also, the fact we both hadn't been in a rowing boat before, we kind of had to learn to row as well, which is kind of how the Have a Go Row came about. So it all came about by Steve sending me an email. I was quickly convinced, and then we got our heads together, and for the first time, because we've done events before, but for the first time we had to learn to operate kind of from the admin point of view as well as the physical side. So we had to kind of become project managers and I'll say finance experts and kind of everything, because the project involves a lot.
And Steve, you were you knocking on an open door in your approach to your prospective partner there? You chosen from a cast of thousands of applicants. Was that how it worked?
He was the first choice, and I couldn't think of anybody else.
The biggest network.
It's not a huge group to choose from that I thought I could get along with for 54 days at sea.
Sure, and it's obviously very inspiring for people. They were out on the water with you, Steve, yesterday. I've seen the pictures, and we've got, after a 26-year gap, I think, from somebody from Jersey rowing the Atlantic, we've got a crew coming up this December. I've heard talk that potentially they're not going to be the last ones. You quite excited to see that you might be setting a bit of a trend, or are you going to have people's partners who are being left behind coming back saying, look what you've got my husband or wife into?
That's happened before. That's another podcast. Yeah, I mean, listen, we were surprised when it's been on my list for a long time, and Pete's followed the race as well. But we were quite surprised, and I suppose possibly disappointed that it had been 20 odd years since the last rowers from Jersey. I mean, we're surrounded by wonderful waters and great places to train. It was a shame that nobody had rowed it in between the sort of, there's 3 or 4 chaps that had rowed, or more than that, 3 or 4 teams that had rowed back in sort of 97 and then 2001, and then there was a big old gap. So hopefully we'll have another couple of years where people are sort of showing an interest and taking part, because it's a positively life-changing experience. So it's I think get involved. We've just proven that 2 normal people with no rowing experience can get this done as a 2-year project. So if we can, anybody can.
Sure, and following the race from afar, Pete, we've we mainly via the website and the tracker, and it became something of a part of the daily routine for us back here on dry land. And I spoke to your wife about she would tend to wake up at 4 o'clock and wouldn't get back to sleep unless she checked the 4 a.m. update for that. But it came across as being well organised. They've obviously had a few rodeos, the Talisker Whiskey Challenge. Was the organisation something that helped 2 people like you who hadn't rowed, get from zero to hero in a couple of years? Yeah,
there's 2 ways of rowing the Atlantic, and that was kind of an early part of the decision process for us. You can do it as part of an organised race like the race we did, or you can kind of do it outside of the race. Doing it as part of the race is probably more expensive, but comes with the sort of organisation. So you are, I guess, in inverted commas, safer, and got some a level of assistance you can call upon if things go wrong. If you do it kind of outside of the race, there's a lot more risks attached to it. So since we're both family men and have kids, and wives, we decided we very much wanted to do it the first way. The race organisation itself is excellent. You've got a lot of criteria you need to meet before you can even get out there. You've got qualifying rowing you need to do. You've got pre-inspections on the boat and all the equipment. You've got a lot of stuff you need to do when you get to Spain, another inspection, and so people testing you on how to use your equipment. You've got to go and do mandatory courses, which we did a year ago, which was a week long, quite intensive in sea survival, navigation, and all sorts of other kind of relevant topics. So there's a lot involved, and we were kind of very happy with the race organisers. And whilst we were on our own out there, we were putting in kind of every other day satellite calls to the race organisers to let them know we were okay and sort of talk through any issues we may have been having.
And from just tracking back to my memory of following it, a reasonably positive and not too many problems over your first couple of weeks, and Christmas Day okay, and then suddenly things started to get really quite difficult after that.
So the first 2 weeks we were learning to row the Atlantic, really learning about the conditions. Because as much as we rowed here, the conditions are completely different, a lot calmer, a lot more predictable. So the first 2 weeks, we did have some interesting weather. It was a bit wild at times, but we could row in it, and we were sort of very much learning how to do it. But come Christmas Day, we had some significant weather. We were further north, I believe, than the rest of the fleet, and we got kind of some low pressure systems, and we took the brunt of some 4 days of sustained bad weather, and was pretty much stuck still for 4 days.
And you're actually confined to quarters as well. It's not you basically couldn't go out. Is that right, Steve?
Pretty much. I mean, you could go out on the deck. If you went on the deck, you'd be getting thrown all over the boat, and you'd be getting soaked with waves that were crashing over the top. So if you went on deck, you'd end up soaked in seawater. which you don't really want. And it was just pretty petrifying, to be honest, sitting out there looking at what was coming towards you and wondering which wave is going to be the one to sink you, or capsize you at least. Or you could stay in the tiny little cabin, which was hot, stuffy, airless and uncomfortable. And we both kind of alternated. There wasn't really much room for two people in there, so Pete would go on the deck and I would be able to stretch out, and then we'd alternate. But ultimately we ended up spending so much time lying down, just wishing the hours away and being quite annoyed that we were being overtaken and we were losing ground, and that we ended up, you're getting bed sores on your heels and your shoulder blades from lying on the quite a sort of coarse mattress, because it's quite sort of durable fabric, but not very comfortable to lie on for long periods of time.
No, sure. And during that 4 days, did that wave, or did you think that wave had actually come and was going to take you over?
I mean, it felt, when we were in the cabin, it felt like someone with a sledgehammer was kind of banging the side of the boat, and these were relatively smaller waves, so that this sledgehammer sound would be fairly consistent, and just every now and then we just get a mighty whack from a larger wave, and the boat would significantly kind of tip. Never to the point where we really felt we were going to capsize, but it's pretty scary at the time.
It often sounded worse inside the cabin than what you'd experienced sitting on the deck. If you were rowing, you'd see it come in, or you'd feel it. But if you're in the cabin, you almost heard it sort of approaching like a train. Almost,
well, I know that there was one, wasn't there, where I think you were outside and I was in.
Yeah, that was
and
scary.
I think that's probably the closest we got.
Yeah, and the boat went right over right side.
You used your body weight, didn't you?
Try and keep the boat from going over.
And presumably there's you had to be ready at this stage, so that there's a drill, is there a grab bag, or is there something that you're trained and as ready as you can be, that if you do go over, that you know what to do? How would that have worked?
Yeah, I mean it's something we weren't really trained in, something you hadn't really practiced. We are connected to the boat, so we've got a 3-point sort of harness, so we're tethered to the boat. So if the boat does go over, we're not going to drift away from it, which is good. But it's still very worrying to know that you're going over. It's a 1,200 kilo boat with oars swinging around. There's kit on there. There's a lot of potential for injury. And if you can't actually physically get more than a metre away from it, you're now upside down under the boat in a big wave, getting hit by everything and anything that's on the boat. So it's and that's something that you couldn't really practice. So you do kind of think, what would happen? Thankfully, we never had to experience that. Our boat's very stable. That's its 5th crossing without a capsize, apparently.
And if you were ever in doubt about the backup of having the race organisers, and not that they were sort of, there was a boat, rescue boat alongside you or anything like that, but when you heard about the fight or die crew, the American crew who had to abandon, which I think was during that Christmas to New Year period, I guess that news reached you guys, or were they sort of keeping it from you?
I actually heard, I think we heard via our partners, by our wives, because we were in touch with people via WhatsApp, and we heard that they had capsized, and thankfully they had been picked up and rescued. It's a sobering thought, but the reality out there is you're out of control with kind of everything that's going on. The ocean's kind of got its own design and what it wants to do, and we had to kind of accept that early on. So we got to know all of the teams in La Gomera, including the fight or die chaps. So we were just really pleased to hear they were both, all 4 of them were safe and had been rescued. And from what I understand, in situations like those, the vessel is kind of left. And it gets recovered when it gets washed up somewhere later on.
Yeah, sure. And from that, getting out the other side of about 4 days, is that right? That you were really in up against it and confined to quarters for lots of that. I guess that was perhaps the most extreme. But you seem to have a fair few number of technical issues. So it was there weren't actually that many periods of plain sailing. There was usually something to keep you focused. Is that right?
Yeah, the main issues. Well, we had an early issue with our water maker, which was fairly continuous. Our water maker was an older model. Whilst it had been serviced and it very much worked, the water intake was through the hull of the boat, and so as we were going along invariably bumpy waters, we'd get airlocks, and it would mean the water maker would stop working unless we were kind of sort of removing those airlocks, which was hard to do in the conditions we were in. So we had to resort to a manual water pump for the majority of the race, which meant manual pumping as well as manual rowing. So that was quite exhausting. And then we had secondary issues with our GPS. So again, most of the race, when we were out of sight of land, we would keep losing signal, which basically meant we were kind of operating off a manual compass, and never really knew exactly where we were, which was a challenge. So I think they were pretty much the main two challenges we had.
And having some contact with other craft, you had one of the other competitors, I think, pretty much alongside you, and then on a different scale, the ocean cruise liner. Those, I guess, having flashes of company, having been alone for so much. Certainly, when I spoke to Pete before, he was saying that was a high point. Steve, would you?
Yeah, agree? Absolutely. It's funny, you do these things to get away from people, and then you're quite excited when you see them. Yeah, the cruise ship was definitely a high point, and almost physically bumping into our competitors. So another pairs team in the open class, they were, we were neck and neck with them for about a month, and we came to within about 30 or 40 metres of them, which is just kind of unheard of to meet up 2,000 miles in the middle of the Atlantic. But we did, we were able to see them and shout to them, and when they were too far away, we'd revert to the VHF radio and have a chat.
And that created you talked about meeting the other crews in La Gomera, and I guess a selection of them in Antigua as well, the ones who arrived either just before or just after you. I guess it's a sort of small elite, but community. You'll always have that link, do you think? Yeah,
absolutely. And with all these races that we've done, that's kind of why we do it, I suppose. It's you make some great friends, and what you often do is you meet quite inspirational people that are doing other things as well. So that's how you get down this rabbit hole. You sort of do an ultra marathon, and you meet a load of people that are doing longer ultra marathons. So they tell you about it, and it sparks a little interest. So you start looking at these things. I mean, we were chatting to some amazingly inspirational people in La Gomera, like Bernie Hollywood, who's still out there rowing now. 66-year-old chap, I think he is. That's he's been North Pole, South Pole, and 8,000 metre mountains, and he's still out there rowing now. So you meet some amazing people doing some amazing things.
And you'll be still tuned in, I guess, Pete. We talked about following the radar now. Just 3 solo rowers still out there, and I guess hoping that they're going to make it across in due course. They've still got a few weeks to go, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've got Linda, Bernie, who Steve just mentioned, and I believe Lara. So you've got 3 of them out there. I think Lara's 350 miles to go now, so she'll be the next in. But yeah, it's exciting following them, and as I say, it's they're all really inspirational people, and to be doing this kind of monumental challenge on your own, it is something else. Steve and I obviously both experienced 54 days of it, and we at least had each other to keep company. But yeah, it's hard to imagine quite sort of doing it on your own, particularly for 85 days plus.
And we touched on your rowing experience, or lack of. You were just reflecting on some of the technical challenges that you have. Are either of you DIY whizzes, or in terms of getting out with the screwdriver and doing things? Because you had to do stuff on the hoof, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we had an honest chat about this in Spain, and I said to Steve that if I'm definitely not a DIY person. I said I'll certainly do my best. So Steve knew he had all the pressure on him straight away to fix anything, and I'd be a willing and able assistant if needed. And I think that's pretty much. I'll let Steve jump in here.
Yeah, no, I mean it's I've always been quite honest. I'm not the most practical of chaps. but I'm a lot more practical than Pete. I'm fairly hands-on in work, so I work with our maintenance guys, so I'm fairly sort of pragmatic and can figure most things out. So, that was quite a responsibility to have, actually. I knew that was falling on my shoulders, so it was a bit to sort of carry, knowing that everything was breaking down, and that, I think, is just life at sea. I believe that I don't think there was anything special about us, I don't think we were unlucky. I think that is genuinely just what happens at sea for weeks on end, is that things corrode and things break. But we managed to fix what we could and make do and MacGyver. What we could do, what we needed to do to get through. But it's interesting, and we always sort of laugh about it. So when you've got lots of spares, you've got 4 auto tillers, you're kind of a little bit careless with them. It's okay, we've got 4 of them, we'll be okay. When you're down to 1.5, you start treating them like your little child, your baby girl, you're sort of handing them to each other. And I think we ended up sleeping with the auto tillers just so they could be protected by us at night.
And were you able to, obviously you were of the crew, you were the lead man on maintenance day. Did you have support from elsewhere in terms of asking people via messages to say, look, I can't fix this, what would you recommend? Is there some backup there?
Yeah, I mean, when the auto tillers broke, so these are a mechanical device that'll help us to steer. I was on the phone to the company in the UK, Ray Marine. I'd spoken to the guys in America and they couldn't help me, so they put me on to the guys in the UK. And they'd sort of, I'd say, look, I've taken it apart. I'm looking at a circuit board. There's a little bit that's burnt out to the right of the screen. Oh, that's not good, he'd say. So he'd sort of talk me through what he could, but it was still very difficult because you're doing this in a 40-degree cabin. The hatches are closed. You've got no air. You've got a head torch on. You're trying to sort of take apart and dismantle a motor or a circuit board for a piece of equipment you've never seen before. And you're sweating in there because it's so hot, and your hands are everything's sweating onto the electrical equipment you're trying to fix and repair. So it wasn't easy, but I quite enjoyed that side of it.
And then we were again following remotely. There seemed to be a sort of a spell from 700-800 miles to go to 2-3, where perhaps it was things were maybe a little easier, and then you had a bit of a sting in the tail over the last few days. Was that particularly difficult because you knew how close you were, or was it the fact that we've got 80% of the race in the bag, we're okay? How was that last week or so?
I mean, the final, I think when we got through, 1,000 miles to go, we were conscious of what we'd been doing before then, which seemed to be averaging quite a healthy 50 miles a day, and I think we both then got it into our head. We were trying to work out, okay, there's 1,000 to go, that's X days left, and it did seem to be for that big chunk of the race, from 1,000 all the way down to 200 to go, that we hit some really slow conditions, and we didn't really have a whole lot of assistance really with us. No wind, certainly currents not helping us, and we were doing very slow progress, wasn't it? It's like anything from 40 miles down to 25, and it became sort of quite frustrating. Certainly from 1,000 down to 150, 200 to go.
Yeah, it was a real kick in the teeth, really, because we lost GPS signal. Our weather router was kind of he was in touch with us, but he was focused on 3 teams or 4 teams, and we got blown south a lot. So they were telling us to sort of head north, and we were heading north, and they kept saying, keep heading north, keep doing what you're doing, which we were. It's only when we sort of got GPS back about 3 days later that we saw we'd been blown a long way south and would really have to battle to get north again. And we saw our estimated finish date. So it was the 1st of February, and all of a sudden it moved to the 10th or 11th of February. And that was horrendous. That was somebody moving the goalposts massively. Mm-hmm. Especially when you knew that your family were already in Antigua waiting for you to arrive in a couple of days, and all of a sudden you're like, right, now they're going to be back in Jersey before we arrive, and we've also got to carry on rowing for another 10 or 11 days, but then things moved in our favour, and we managed to sort of get that finish date down to the 4th or 5th of Feb. But yeah, that was horrible. It took us days, I think days emotionally, to get over that. that somebody had moved the goalposts so far. And no, nobody had moved the goalposts. It was just the weather and tide had taken us south, and we needed to battle again to get north. But that was really frustrating.
And on the Saturday night, Sunday morning here, I'm ashamed to say I had set an alarm for something like 5 o'clock because that was the latest estimate, and I was an hour late. So I missed you on the live, but I'd like to think there was a certain level of very basic commitment there, and you could go back and watch it. So I did. I was able to watch as live there, and the interviews on arrival. Pete Lawn Bowls was mentioned. Have you been? I guess the season's starting in a few weeks' time. You all set for that?
I've actually not managed to get down there yet, but I have inadvertently entered a 100-mile race for January next year, like a running one. So my whole Lawn Bowls prediction has fallen by the wayside a little bit.
As everybody else knew it would, except for Pete.
And Steve, from my memory of that recording, you've just pointed out that Steve was making a claim that is now not true, but you weren't making any claims at all. You were being rather cagey at that point. Has anything moved on in that direction?
My wife was present. I've got a couple of bits. I've got a couple of races sort of this year, but no, I'd like to row again. Okay,
but the races you're planning are going to be on your legs.
Yes, yeah. Cycling and is a triathlon as well as.
And we saw at the end of the race that you had a boat for sale. Is it still for sale?
It's not. No, we've just recently sold.
We
should have the deposit today.
Yeah, exactly. We've agreed on a sale, so we're waiting for the deposit today, and then hopefully we'll be with the new owners in a month's time.
Grant, can we ask where they are?
They're in the UK,
okay.
So they'll be planning to do the race, I believe, in 2024. So with excitement, we'll be able to watch Sonia Atlantico do its 6th crossing.
Yeah, excellent. And I'm sure one of the other things to focus on, you were raising funds for causes. That's something clearly was quite a big part of this. How did that come about, and are you sort of pleased with how that's gone?
Yeah, we're raising for two local causes. We've got Macmillan Jersey and Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust. Came about really. We both had family members impacted by a cancer diagnosis, so hence Macmillan. And Durrell, Steve and I have supported before, back when we did the Amazon ultra marathon back in 2015. So we felt there was a kind of a lot of synergy with the challenge we were doing, and the specific cause we've fundraised for Durrell. And so far so good. We've got an active fundraising page, which we're still trying to get donations to. We're going to put 100% of the sale proceeds from the boat to the charities as well, and we're also hoping to generate some funds from some motivational talks and some public speaking events. So we're still optimistic that we can kind of reach our sort of fundraising goal of between £40,000 and £50,000 to be shared equally between both charities.
Brilliant. So people who have been reading the interview with JP, listening to the Bailiwick Express podcast and sort of wanting to hear more from you, or they've got their own questions for you, there are going to be some events where they can come out and hear from you and fire some questions.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just also wanted to focus just a tiny bit on the comms side. We spoke when you were in Antigua, Pete, about how you'd been able to keep in touch. Your social media was being run by a former Atlantic rower, is that right? Yeah,
that's correct. We was put in touch with a chap. He tends to run the social media campaigns for a select number of teams per year. We quickly got in touch and kind of became one of his teams for the year we did it. And he was absolutely amazing. We had the responsibility of giving him a bit of content, both before the row and during. So we had it's called a BGAN when we were out on the boat. So it's like a portable router. So we were able to connect to the internet that way and use WhatsApp to send sort of basic images and some compressed video back to Barry. But outside of that, Barry has rowed the ocean, I believe, once or twice before. He's an expert in the subject matter of ocean rowing. So he was able to take what we'd given him, and he was very clued up on what was going on in the race on a day-by-day basis, and he was able to put together some just amazing content to share it across LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram.
And I sense that although none of these pictures actually saw the light of day on social media, because there are guidelines and things that prevent people doing that, I have the impression he may have had to sift through some somewhat candid shots involving not much clothing before he could actually find some things that would be printed. Steve, you're shaking your head in a sort of way that suggests I'm on the money there.
Yeah, I mean, there was never any clothing really. It's my wife phoned up and or WhatsApp and said, "I'm fed up of seeing photos of your bum in the paper." And I said, well, A, I didn't know the photos were being taken, so you need to speak to Pete about that. And B, it's not like I'm getting undressed for these images. That's how I always am.
Yeah, Steve needed little encouragement to take his clothes off. I think we were half an hour into the challenge and off they came. So.
And so the budgie smugglers that you were wearing on arrival in Antigua...
I felt overdressed.
Brilliant. Well, it's been... I'm relieved to see you two fully dressed interviewees and a fully dressed interviewer today. And just finally with you guys, just on the overall experience, you've had this in your mind for a while. Do you have spells when you stop and can't quite believe that it happened, or was 8 weeks of it quite enough for you never to forget that it did happen?
I'm not sure. From me, it's there's been no sort of sometimes after a race or something you've been focusing on for a long time, when it's over, you sort of, there's a gap, there's a void. How do you fill that? And you feel a bit down, you feel a bit lost. I haven't really had any of that. I haven't had any overriding sort of feelings of emotion. I do tend to find myself gazing out to sea a fair bit, which is great. I'm actually missing the water. I'm missing being out on the water. I'm missing being at sea. I found it an environment that I felt quite comfortable in and enjoyed life at sea. So that's why I'd certainly look to do it again. So yeah, I'm kind of that's the overriding emotion I have, is that I miss being at sea.
And Pete, from your side, and also maybe touching on the fact of some of there were a couple of training ground problems last summer, which I think when we spoke in Antigua, you said had weren't quite as bad as they were reported.
Yeah.
Not that I'm turning on the media here, but also but perhaps acted as a bit of motivation.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with that one. Yeah, we had to do a number of qualifying hours rowing, and Steve and I did actually find it quite difficult, with work commitments to find a time we could both go out on the boat, and then you've got the unpredictability of the conditions and whether you can actually do it. So we decided to go out one bank holiday weekend in May. The conditions probably weren't the best, but we went for it anyway, and we ended up getting stuck on sea anchor as a wind prevented us rowing back to Jersey. So we basically knew we had to get back for work. We couldn't really afford to stay out there for 5 or 6 days, which is what it would have been. So we just put a call in requesting a tow back from any passing vessel, in the next day or so, just to enable us to get back to work. And that ended up being an R&I pickup, because they were the nearest in the vicinity, and it got perhaps reported that we were rescued at sea, and we had a few negative comments on the back of that about whether we were really prepared to take on the challenge we were about to do. But we took that as motivation. We took the comments tongue in cheek, didn't take them too seriously, but we also took it as motivation to prove a few people wrong, which I think is what we did. And it sort of goes to show that, nothing is impossible. And
on reflection, that sort of 36 hours that we had on power anchor off the west coast of Jersey in a 4.6 was probably the single best training session that we did in preparation for what we were about to sort of take on. So on day 2, when we were in the Atlantic and we were going down sort of 15-20 foot waves and having waves crashing all over the boat, we felt well prepared, probably a lot better prepared than many of the other teams that were enduring the same conditions.
Well, it's been inspirational to hear about it all. You've got somebody sat here who's never rowed, who has wondered with a couple of contemporaries whether Sark might be manageable. So it's provided food and fuel for thought. So if that's not a contradiction, it's been great to hear from you, Steve Hayes and Pete Wright. Thanks to Pete and Steve for coming in to chat to us about the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. Pete and Steve are still raising money for the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust and Macmillan Cancer Support, and you can donate on their sports giving page. Don't forget to visit bailiwickexpress.com or to pick up a copy of the Jersey Evening Post.